Mara Devlin smiled quietly as Dylan Cross slept just feet away, unaware that his life was about to end in a single, brutal swing of a hatchet. What drove a young woman to plan a murder with such chilling calm? And how could she sit afterward, smiling as if nothing had happened? This is the story of betrayal, obsession, and a night that turned a peaceful town into a place haunted by fear. In the peaceful lakeside town of Pine Hollow, the rhythm of daily life rarely changed. Mornings began with the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery, afternoons were filled with the sound of children cycling along the winding streets, and evenings ended with the glow of porch lights reflecting on the still water. Neighbors trusted each other so completely that doors were left unlocked and cars sat unattended with keys inside. For years, the town felt insulated from the troubles that haunted larger cities. That illusion shattered on a cold autumn morning when the first hints of violence rippled across the quiet landscape. A heavy mist clung to the pine trees as a call came into the county sheriff's office. The voice on the other end was trembling but clear, reporting strange noises and a figure sitting motionless outside a small wooden cabin at the edge of the forest. Deputies arrived, expecting to find a trespasser or perhaps a medical emergency. Instead, they stepped into a scene that would define Pine Hollow's history. Inside the dim cabin, lit only by the pale morning light leaking through thin curtains, lay a man sprawled on the bedroom floor. The air smelled of iron and damp wood. His head and shoulders bore the unmistakable marks of a hatchet's heavy blade. The quiet was broken only by the low creak of the floorboards as officers moved carefully through the space, their radios silent out of instinct. Nothing suggested a struggle. No overturned furniture, no shattered glass, only the chilling finality of a planned attack. Outside on the porch, a young woman sat calmly with her hands folded in her lap. She was dressed neatly in a dark sweater and jeans, her hair tied back, as if she had prepared for an ordinary day. When the deputies approached, she lifted her eyes and offered a small, almost polite smile. The contrast between her composure and the blood-streaked room behind her sent an unspoken chill through the responding officers. They asked her name and she answered softly, Mara Devlin. She did not attempt to flee or explain. She only sat beneath the gray morning sky, watching the mist drift across the lake as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Residents who had never locked their doors now checked their bolts twice, and the town that once prided itself on safety began to feel the weight of a secret that would linger far beyond that single morning. Mara Devlin and Dylan Cross had once been the kind of couple neighbors admired. They were often seen carrying groceries together from the small market or walking hand in hand along the lake's quiet trail. At first glance, their relationship appeared steady and uncomplicated, the sort of partnership that seemed destined to last. Friends remembered their laughter at summer barbecues and the way Dylan always opened doors for her, a small courtesy that made their bond seem unshakable. Yet beneath those pleasant details, a slow tension was building. It began as subtle changes, Dylan staying out later than usual, Mara glancing at her phone with a tightening jaw when messages went unanswered. Conversations that once flowed easily became clipped and careful, as if both were afraid of what might be said next. Money was a shadow neither could ignore. Dylan's job at the local marina brought in little during the colder months, and Mara's part-time shifts at a craft shop barely covered their rent. Bills accumulated in a drawer no one wanted to open. When neighbors asked how they were managing, Mara would smile and change the subject. Behind closed doors, the strain deepened. People living nearby reported muffled arguments that rose and fell like distant thunder, never lasting long but carrying a sharpness that made listeners uneasy. There were whispers about Dylan's growing restlessness. He had begun making frequent trips to a neighboring town, claiming he needed extra work or supplies, though no one saw evidence of new income. A few of his friends noticed. He guarded his phone, shielding the screen when messages arrived. Some speculated about another woman, while others suspected gambling debts. Nothing was ever confirmed, but the secrecy fed Mara's quiet frustration. For her part, Mara withdrew into a kind of controlled silence. She stopped attending the small social gatherings she once enjoyed and spent long evenings walking the lakeshore alone. Those who passed her on the trail described her expression as distant, her gaze fixed on something unseen across the water. Friends tried to reach out, but she deflected with practiced ease, offering vague reassurances that everything was fine. By late autumn, the warmth between them had thinned to a fragile thread. What had begun as small irritations, missed calls, late nights, unexplained expenses had hardened into an unspoken rift. Outsiders still saw a young couple sharing a quiet life, but anyone looking closely might have sensed the weight pressing down on their home. It was a tension that hummed just beneath the surface, waiting for a single spark to turn quiet discontent into something far more dangerous. The night of the attack was ordinary at first, with a calmness that made the violence that followed even more shocking. The autumn wind whispered through the trees, and the wooden cabin creaked softly as if settling into the darkness. Dylan returned home late, the faint smell of alcohol clinging to his clothes. He had been out drinking with friends, but nothing in his appearance suggested he was prepared for what awaited him. He unlocked the door, kicked off his boots, and collapsed onto the bed, sinking into a deep, unguarded sleep. The warmth of the blankets did little to shield him from the quiet that had been waiting all evening, a silence Mara had carefully orchestrated. Investigators later pieced together the timeline through phone records and surveillance cameras along the road. Mara's movements were precise. She had placed the hatchet near the doorway earlier in the day, arranging it so that it would be within easy reach. Every step she took that night seemed calculated, as if she were following a ritual only she knew. The security footage showed no unusual activity from outside, no signs of disturbance, no visitors to the cabin. The night swallowed every hint of what was about to unfold. Once Dylan's breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, Mara moved with quiet certainty across the bedroom floor. The hatchet, heavy in her hand, reflected the dim light of a single bedside lamp. The first swing landed with brutal accuracy, cutting through the room's stillness like a violent punctuation mark. The second swing followed without hesitation, deliberate and controlled, aimed at ensuring no chance remained for resistance. The act was swift, almost mechanical, leaving no room for chance. There was no struggle, no shouted words, no cries to pierce the night, only the sudden, chilling finality of the attack. Neighbors remained unaware until morning, when the mist rose from the lake and light spilled into the cabin's windows. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath, as if nature itself sensed the disruption. Mara emerged from the room calmly, placing herself on the porch in the gray pre-dawn light. Her posture was composed, almost casual, and the small smile she offered when police arrived betrayed no hint of panic or remorse. The officers who responded later described the scene as surreal. The calm exterior of a woman seated in the soft morning haze contrasted sharply with the horror inside. By the time authorities began their investigation, the room had already become a silent witness. Every mark on the floor, every smudge of blood, every discarded shoe told a story of precision and planning. Yet none of it explained the unshakable calm Mara displayed. The cabin, once a symbol of safety and domestic life, had transformed overnight into a grim tableau of premeditation, a place where ordinary love and ordinary life had collided with an extraordinary, horrifying act of violence. As investigators delved deeper into Mara's life, a web of secrets began to emerge, revealing layers of planning and calculation that shocked even seasoned detectives. Dylan's recent life insurance policy became a central point of inquiry. Taken out just months before the attack, the policy named Mara as the sole beneficiary, a fact that suddenly cast a new light on their seemingly ordinary relationship. Every detail of Dylan's finances was scrutinized: bank statements, credit card purchases, and even small withdrawals from his accounts, all pointing toward a life carefully monitored and manipulated from within the household. Digital evidence further complicated the narrative. Mara's phone contained late-night searches for methods of silent attack and instructions on how to make a hatchet strike lethal without waking the victim. Her browsing history was methodical, almost obsessive, revealing a person who had spent weeks researching every aspect of the act she would ultimately commit. Messages on social media and encrypted apps were erased, but fragments recovered by cyber experts hinted at a growing frustration with Dylan's behavior and perhaps a simmering resentment she had never voiced aloud. It became clear that this was not an impulsive act born of anger. It was meticulously planned. Yet despite the evidence, what haunted investigators most was Mara's demeanor. Footage from the night of her arrest showed her sitting on the porch, hands folded neatly, the faintest smile on her lips. Experts and psychologists debated the meaning of that expression. Was it relief at achieving her objective, a sign of cold detachment, or something darker, an unsettling sense of satisfaction? Media outlets seized upon the image, and the photo of her quiet smile became a symbol of the case, leaving viewers and townspeople alike struggling to reconcile the ordinary appearance of a young woman with the extraordinary violence she had committed. Friends and neighbors were left in disbelief. Those who had once admired the couple now questioned every interaction they had witnessed. The arguments overheard from behind thin walls, the long, solitary walks Mara had taken along the lake, the vague evasions when friends asked about Dylan all now seemed like pieces of a puzzle that had gone tragically unnoticed. By the time the police concluded their investigation, they had gathered enough evidence to paint a clear, chilling picture. Mara had not only planned the attack in detail, but had also taken careful steps to control the narrative afterward. Her composure, her calculated movements, and her haunting smile were all part of a story that went far beyond a moment of rage. It was a story of obsession, meticulous planning, and a quiet darkness that could hide in plain sight, leaving a town grappling with a question that had no simple answer. How could someone smile after committing such an unthinkable act? The trial of Mara Devlin became a spectacle that captured the attention of not only Pine Hollow, but the entire region. Reporters filled the small courtroom, their cameras and microphones trained on a case that was as chilling as it was mysterious. Prosecutors presented the evidence with meticulous care: Dylan's life insurance, Mara's digital footprint, the timeline of the attack, and forensic reports detailing the precision of the hatchet strike. Each piece of evidence painted Mara as a calculating figure, one who had spent weeks, if not months, planning every detail of the crime. The defense attempted to suggest emotional instability, claiming that years of tension and perceived betrayal might have driven Mara to a breaking point. They pointed to her solitary habits, her quiet withdrawals from friends, and the subtle signs of stress that had gone unnoticed. But for many, the argument rang hollow against the cold precision of her actions. Witnesses described Dylan's growing restlessness, but none could account for the careful planning that went into his murder. The prosecution countered every point with digital records, eyewitness testimony, and the haunting body camera footage of Mara's calm demeanor at the crime scene. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect for the jury was Mara's composure. She did not cry, flinch, or offer excuses. She sat through each day of testimony with the same quiet poise, her expression calm, her eyes steady. The small, almost serene smile she had displayed the morning of the attack seemed to resurface at times, leaving jurors unsettled and public interest at a fever pitch. Outside the courthouse, townspeople gathered, divided between disbelief and fear. Some whispered that Mara was a sociopath, others clung to the hope that there was a motive no one had yet discovered. Yet even as the trial unfolded, the sense of ordinary domestic life shattered, replaced by a lingering suspicion that anyone, even someone who smiled softly and seemed composed, could harbor an unfathomable darkness. After only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Mara Devlin was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained tense as the sentence was read, her calm expression unchanging. The verdict brought legal closure, but it offered little emotional resolution for the town. Pine Hollow would carry the memory of that night for years. Neighbors who had once trusted each other now double-checked doors and locks. And the cabin at the edge of the forest became a symbol of how quickly ordinary life could be fractured. Even years later, the haunting question endured. Why had Mara smiled? Was it relief, satisfaction, or something darker beyond comprehension? The mystery lingered in the town's collective consciousness, a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most ordinary faces can hide the most extraordinary darkness. Pine Hollow learned that some questions are never fully answered, leaving a story that continues to echo in quiet corners and misty mornings.